Today, we are breaking out with an advanced budget calculator, live charts, smart categories, multiple incomes, and more. Huge shout out to Monica S25 for dropping this challenge. Let's escape boring budgeting once and for all. Hey everyone, my name is Vivek and welcome to Escape Room Coding. Smash that like, hit subscribe, and let's step into room 1, the Foundation Fortress. In this room, we are laying the very first stone, setting up our project structure and unlocking the secret door with a minimal Flask app. This is our project structure. We have app.py, auth.py, database.py, main.py, and I have also created a couple of static files, for example, css.styles, and some template or front-end files, like the base.html, dashboard, login, and register. To complete this project, we need Flask, Flask login, matplotlib, and pandas library. The functions and the classes inside these libraries will help us complete our task. Before installing these libraries, let's create a virtual environment. So go to View, Terminal. To create a virtual environment, type this command, python-m venv, and give the name of your virtual environment. I'll just say test, hit enter. To activate the virtual environment, type the name of your virtual environment and then scripts, and then activate. Hit enter. If you see the name of your virtual environment appearing in the beginning of your command prompt, that means it has been activated. Now let's install the libraries. To install them, type this command, pip install -r and then requirement.txt, the name of the file. Hit enter, and that's it. The libraries got installed. Now let's create our first application. Go to app.py. This is where we are writing our first application. If you are already familiar with Flask and Python, you can move on to the next room. But if you are just starting out, I would recommend you to watch this. Alright, first we'll import our Flask library. From Flask, import Flask. So this will import the Flask libraries within this application. And then let's initialize the application. Let's create an app object, app equals to Flask, and within brackets, give the variable name, and that's it. This line creates your web application object, which holds all your routes, settings, and configuration. Without this, Flask doesn't know what app to run. Let's create a route. To create a route, use the app object and then mention the route function, which will create our first route. Inside the brackets, give inverted commas and then put a /. After this, let's create a function, def home, and this function is going to return a simple message, say hello budget. What this line tells is, when a user goes to the root URL, this represents the root URL, run this function. Think of route as door into your app, and app.py is where you define them. To run this application, we have to write 2 more lines of code. That is, if name equals to main, then we'll use the app object and then run function. So app.run, run this app, and we are setting debug equals to true. This line checks if you are directly running the file, app.py file. If yes, it launches Flask built-in server at the root URL. If you import this app into another file, the server won't auto-run. In a Flask project, the file app.py is often used as the entry point, meaning it's the file you run to start your web application. Now to run the web application, we have to go to View and then Terminal. Let me clear this. Here, just type this command, python, and then give the name of the file, that is app.py. Hit enter. This is the URL or the root URL I was talking about. To check the output, click on this link. It should run our browser like this, and it will show the output. This is the root URL, and right now we are just returning a simple message, right, from this function. Let's update the function and return a bold text, right? So to do that, go to your function and just give the HTML tag, says /b for bold, or let's make it a heading. I'll give h1 and then close the h1 tag, h1. Save it. Since the app is already running, we can see here, right? We can directly go to our browser and refresh this page. Here it is. So this is the output. Let me stop the execution by pressing Ctrl C, clear my screen. See you in the next room. Hey, congratulations. You have successfully completed room 1. Now step into room 2, the database dungeon. In this room, I am going to build the logic for database.py file. We'll write code to create our database, budget.db, tables like users, categories, and expenses. Since we'll be working with database, tables, and select queries, let's import SQLite 3. Import SQLite 3. We'll also import WACZook for security and hashing the user's password. From this package .security import generate hash password. We want this so that we can hash the user's password in the users table. Let's create a variable for our database name, and the value of this variable is budget.db. Now let's create a connection object, con equals to SQLite3.connect, and we'll give the db name, db name. We are also going to set row factory equals to SQLite3.row. That's it. So this will create a connection, and we are setting the property row factory to our connection object. We know that application like Advanced Budget Calculator is going to access database very frequently for selecting data from the tables and for creating data. For running any SQL query, we have to create a database connection, right? Now, repeating this code all over your project, it's not the best practice. What we can do is we can convert these 2 lines of code into a function, a helper function, so that we can use that function whenever we want. So we'll just define def and then let's say get db. Now indentation is important in Python. Push this line inside and then this as well. When we call this function, we want the connection object. So we'll just return the connection object. Now that we have our connection object, let's initialize the database, right? So we'll create a function def init underscore db. We'll use this function to initialize the database. By initializing, I mean creating tables inside the database. For creating tables in the database, we need a connection object. The connection equals to get underscore db, and we'll create a cursor object, connection.cursor. First, let's create our users table. To create the users table, we have to execute this SQL statement. Now this is pretty straightforward. It says create the users table if it is not there in the database. Now this table will have ID, email, and password as the column, and ID is the primary key. Now let's create our category table. Alright, so this is the SQL statement for creating our categories table. This is also pretty much straightforward. So create the table with ID, name, and user ID as the columns. User ID is going to be the foreign key, and this key is going to refer to ID column of users table. So it's like one user can have multiple categories. So the relation here would be one-to-many relation, right? One user can have many categories. Now let's create the expense table. For the expense table, we have the ID column, title, amount, date. The categories underscore ID and users underscore ID are going to be the foreign key for this table, right? So it's like one user can have multiple expenses, and those expenses can belong to one category. So it's like that, right? We are almost done with our coding for the database.py file. Now we just have to commit the changes. Connection.commit and then connection.close. Here you can see 2 yellow lines under connection object. Can you guess the reason why this is coming? That is because the connection object conn is created inside init underscore db function, and if you see the indentation of this function is here, right, and the indentations finishes here. These 2 lines should be pushed inside at this level to fix this error. So click here, tab, click here, tab. Alright, so that's our database.py file, and here I'm creating a database called budget.db, couple of tables, user, categories, and expenses. Think of this as the foundation of your house. Walls for users, rooms for categories, and furnitures for your expenses. Now let's call this function init.db to create our database and the tables. In here, I'll just say init_db, go to view, terminal, and then Python, give the name of your database file, database.py. So we don't have any output because we are not calling any front-end files or we are not printing anything, in this file. That's why we don't have any output. But what we can see is we can see the budget.db file. The database got created, right? We can see the database budget.db and the table structures in our SQLite Studio over here. We just have to add the database from here, select it. Now it is inside this folder, select the database, open it. That's okay. So this is our database, right? Budget.db. Loans database is coming from other project. I'll just delete this, right? So this is our database. Inside this, we have three tables, categories, expenses, and users. Just double click on any of the table and it will give you the structure. To check the SQL statement that created these files, just click on the DDL tab. So this is our query or SQL create statement. I hope this is clear. Drop your questions in the comments. See you in the next room. Let's build the logic for registration, login and logout in auth.py. And also let's build the front end for registration, login and logout in these files. In auth.py, let's import the modules. Right, so let's create an object of Flask blueprint URL_prefix equals to /auth. What is blueprint? In Flask, blueprint is like a mini app inside our main app. It groups related URLs and logics together. For example, auth_bp is for authentication. Here auth is the name of the blueprint. __name, this variable tells Flask where this blueprint lives. URL prefix equals to auth. All routes inside this blueprint will start with /auth. Alright, now let's create a model class for the user table. So class user, inside the bracket will say user mixin. Let's define our init function and I'll say self, ID, email and password. Self.id equals to ID, self.email equal to email and self.password equals to password. This is a custom user class that represents a user from the database, and we are inheriting from user mixin, which provides useful methods automatically like is_authenticated, is_active and get_id to get the user IDs. Inside the init function, we are setting the values of this object to the values sent to this function. This makes it easy for Flask login to manage user session. Now let's create a function to find a user by email ID. So here is the code for that. Now this function is going to find a user based on the email ID. The first few lines are very simple, like creating a database connection, creating a cursor, and then executing the SQL statement. We are fetching one record and then closing the connection. The important thing to notice is this line. Now here what I'm doing is creating an object of user class. We are passing ID, email ID, and password from row to the init function. So when you call this function, you will get an object of type user, and that object will have properties or attributes like is_authenticated, is_active. So basically we'll be able to check these parameters. That's why we inherited from user mixin. Similarly, let's create another function to find a user based on its ID. So def find the user by ID, passing the user ID. The first 5 lines are almost same as the first one. The find user by email ID function. The only difference is the user ID parameter here. We are passing the user ID, not the email like the before. Again, we are creating an object or returning an object of user by updating the values of that user object. Now let's create user loader function. For that, let's import login manager from app, right? And then import login_manager at login manager dot user_loader. Let's define a function def, then load_user, passing the user ID, that's it. And then I'll just return find user by ID, user ID. Now, why do we need this function? We need this function because Flask need to know how to load a user from the database when a user is logged in. This line dot user loader register this function as the user loader. User ID is the parameter that comes from the session, and we have already seen this function. Without this function, Flask wouldn't know how to keep a user logged in across request. Now let's create the route for registration. Right, so this is our register route, and we have a function called register. Inside this, we are basically checking if the method is post. If it is a post request, then we are just accepting email and password, creating a database connection and cursor, and just inserting those values, email ID and password, to user table. Right, now please check this line. What I'm doing here is I'm generating a hash password for the password and then saving it in the table. Once the data is successfully saved, I'm just flashing a success message and then redirecting user to login the auth URL. We haven't created this route yet. We'll do it in some time. Right, so here is our login route, getting email ID and password from the form, request form, and then finding the user by email ID. Now I'm checking the user. It is not initial. Then check the user.password, password from the user object, and the password from the request form. If both the password are same, then log in the user and then redirect the user to main.dashboard URL. Login underscore user function. What it does is it will log in the user, save the values in, email ID and password in the session variable, and then basically creating a session for that user. Now let's create a route so that user can log out safely. All right, so here is the route and the function for logging out. We are using logout underscore user function to destroy the session variables which got created from login function right over here, and redirecting users to auth.login URL to this URL. So we are done with the backend logic of authentication like registration, login, and logout. Now let's create the login form in login.html. Before creating the login.html, let's build the base.html, because we'll be extending base.html to all the HTML files, and this is going to be our base template. Right, so this is the code for our base.html. So we are using this CSS file from bootstrap.mini. This is available online. We are also using the CSS style which I'll design locally, which is inside static.css. In the navigation bar, so this is our navigation bar. This anchor tag will be linked to our main.dashboard URL with budget pro as the text. Now check this code. So this is a Jinja 2 template. Here I'm checking if the current user is authenticated. Then we are showing the logout button. Now you must have remember is underscore authenticated. Can you guess what is current underscore user and where this is coming from? Drop your answers in the comment. The first line is going to get those flash messages with category. So here danger is the category and this success is the category. So we are getting all the messages with categories, looping through the message variable over here for categories and message. Very important thing to notice is the categories, danger, success, and there is one more, there is warning. So these all are kind of CSS class in Bootstrap. So if you append or concatenate alert hyphen and then that category name, it will be some sort of CSS class. And based on that, the message will be displayed in color. Like if it is a success, it will be in green color. If it is error or danger, it will be in red color. Then showing the message here. And we have a placeholder for displaying the content for each HTML files. Now let's create our login.html. So this is our login.html, extending everything from base.html, the CSS, JavaScript, or all sort of navigation and everything. This form will accept an email ID and a password, and it has a login button. We've also added a register button beside the login button. Usually when we create a form, we pass a method, and there is one more attribute called action. In this form, I haven't passed that attribute. Will this still work when I click on the login button? Well, the answer is yes, because if you don't specify the action, the form submits to the same URL it's currently on. All right, now let's build our register.html. Here is our register.html file. We are extending from base, giving a title, and then the block content starts from here and here. And that's it. We just completed our authentication vault. Now, if you want to check the output of these URLs, we have to do some changes in app.py file, which I don't want to do it at the moment because this will complicate our project. So if you run this application now, view terminal and then this python.app.py, click on this URL, you should just see this. If you try to check out, let's say auth/login, this will give us some error that the URL is not found. See you in the next room. So this is going to be your finance control center where we can track your every rupee and expenses. So let's get started. So these are the modules we need for creating the dashboard. We are already familiar with Flask, Flask login, and database, right? We created this file in first room. We need matplotlib for creation of the graph, and we want this for plotting the data inside the graph. Base64 is to convert that graph into an image, and date and time to handle our date and time logics. We are not using JavaScript for creating our graphs in this project. We'll be using matplotlib and pyplot. These are Python modules, right? And what this does is they will create your graph in server side or at the backend. We'll convert that graph into an image using base64 module and then send that image to front end in bits and bytes or data stream and then display it as an image in our front end. Now I'm going to create a blueprint object for main.py. I'm just going to say main. If I add a main here, can you figure out what this will do? Drop your answers in the comment. Let's create our root URL for main.py underscore bp route and then the root URL. Let's define a function called home. We are going to return and redirect the user to URL underscore for to our auth.login URL. Login inside auth.py file and then this URL or this route. Now let's create the dashboard URL route and then slash dashboard methods equals to get and then post. Let's define a function called dashboard. Now remember, we want the user to access dashboard URL only when they are logged in. So let's add an attribute here called login required. Here is the definition for the dashboard function. I've created DB connection and a cursor, accepting the title, amount, date, category from our form, and then inserting those values in our expenses table. So this is basically for adding an expense. If the request is not post, I'm getting all the expenses from expense table and passing those expenses to a function for creating a pie chart. We'll create this function in some time, so stay till the end, closing the connection and then returning or rendering dashboard.html, passing all expenses and the chart. Let's build our dashboard.html, and this is the code for the dashboard.html. This is the form I was talking about for adding the expenses. Now this form is not yet completed. I'll add the drop down for the categories in this div, and we have an expense button displaying the expenses over here inside this table, looping through all the expenses and using Jinja 2 template for displaying the details. The chart will be displayed, or the pie chart will be displayed in this place. The graph or the chart will be converted as an image, which is why I've added the img tag or img HTML element. And this is the place, or this is the form for adding a category. Now let's modify our app.py file. This is going to be our entry point to this application, and we don't want hello budget title when we execute this application, right? So let's modify this. Let me remove all these things. First, let's import all the modules. We need Flask, Flask login, SQLite tree, and database. Initializing our app, setting a secret key. Now change this key when you move this entire application to production environment. Let's create a login manager object. Login underscore manager equals to login manager, and then login manager dot login view. So our login view is going to be auth dot login manager dot initialize the app, this app object. Let's import all the blueprint we have created. So we have created a blueprint in auth.py. Where is it? Right over here. And a blueprint in main.py, this one. So let's import these blueprints from auth, import auth blueprint, from main, import main underscore blueprint or BP. We are going to connect these two blueprint to our application. So app.register, register blueprint, auth underscore blueprint, app.register blueprint, main underscore blueprint, right? I'm going to call this function init underscore db. This will initialize our database and create all the tables in that database, if they are not created, of course. So that's it. So this is our integration file, that is app.py. We are registering all the blueprint here and creating a login manager, setting up the database. If you have any questions, drop them in the comment. I'll try to answer those. Hey, congratulations for successfully completing room 4. Now step into room 5, the category chamber. Let's create categories for our expenses. For that, we'll have to modify a main.py file. In this, I'm going to create a function to add categories. So main.route add underscore category, and then methods equals to post. Login required. Let's create a function def add category. Here is the code to add those categories. I'm accepting a name, creating a database connection, and then a cursor, inserting those values in our categories table right over here, and then committing the changes and closing the connection. Finally, redirect the user to main.dashboard to this URL. Here is a quick challenge for you. Try to add validations to the name and then put this entire code in try and except block to avoid any production dumps. Drop your answers in the comment and I will feature the best answer in the next video. Now let's modify our dashboard.html file. Now I've added a placeholder over here saying that we'll add the drop down for this category in this place. So let's add those HTML code. Okay, now let's create the category section, a drop down for the categories, right? In dashboard.html. By default, the category value will be uncategorized. Now I'm going to loop through categories. Now before that, in our main.py, in dashboard, in this function, let's select all the categories from our categories table. This is it. Execute select statement from categories where current user.id, and then fetch all categories, sending the categories to the front end right over here. Let's copy this. I'm going to loop through the categories and then just display the ID and the name of the category. And that's it. See you in the next one. Hey, welcome to room 6, the visualization chamber. Let's generate live pie chart that reveals your spending secret at a glance. In our main.py, inside dashboard route, I've mentioned this function which we have not created. Now we are going to create this. I'm just copying this on top right over here. I'm going to define this function. This function will accept expenses. Let's create a category dictionary. Category equals to this. Loop through the expenses. For every E in expenses, we are going to get the category of that expense. Category, right? If that category, else that would be uncategorized. Now add this cat or category inside our category dictionary. That's it. So this is not a dictionary, this will be a list, my bad. And I'm just setting the category, the cat field of this category equals to category, then get category, and then add the amount to that. I mean, we are concatenating these two values into this field of this list. If there is no categories, let's make these categories, and then I'll just update this and this as well. If there is no category, then I'm just going to return none. All right, so we have those categories and expenses. Now it is time to plot our graph. The first line is going to create a new matplotlib figure and an axis to draw that figure. Think of fig as the paper and the axis the drawing area. This line is basically going to draw a pie chart. Categories.value is the number expenses per categories. This is going to be the label of that category, like food or rent or travel. This parameter shows percentage on each slices of that pie chart. Creating an object of type bytes.io. This line saves the pie chart into the buffer in PNG format. This image will be saved as bits and bytes, right? Now this line is going to set our pointer to the beginning of those bits and bytes so that we can read that file. This line reads the raw image bytes and then convert them into base64 text. This is useful because we can directly embed this chart into an HTML image tag like we are doing in this place. Finally, we are just closing the figure to free up the memory. This line returns the base64 encoded string, so Flask can send it to the template, to the HTML template. Save this file. Now go back to our dashboard route. Right over here. Here I'm getting the chart from this function, returning this chart in here, like to the dashboard.html. Go to dashboard.html. Inside this, I'm displaying that image, that pie chart image right over here. That's it in this room. See you in the next one. Hey, welcome back. Congratulations for completing room 6. Now step into room 7, styling and UX polish. We are going to design our app by adding CSS. I'll make this quick. Let me create the CSS style and in a minute I'll show you the CSS codes. Alright, so here is our CSS style. Nothing too fancy, just added some of the basic styles. Like for the body, I've added a font family to this, background color white, margin padding 0, all the containers class top margin 30 pixels, and for the navigation I've added some gradient. So it's pretty simple, and that's it. See you in the next room. It is time to run our application and see the results. So go to view, terminal. I'm just going to clear my screen and then Python app.py. Okay, so we have some errors. Let's fix those. Let's go to the top. So we have an error over here. Register main underscore BP, which is in app.py. Alright, let's try to fix this error. I'll just minimize this. And this is fine. Okay. And then this looks okay. Let's open, where is it? Main.py. Inside this, there is something wrong with this. This should be methods. How about this one? This is okay. Right, and this looks fine. The setup method route can no longer be called in blueprint auth. So what this error is trying to tell is that I'm importing the auth underscore blueprint, right? But the error says is I'm importing this before it is getting defined. So let's fix this in app.py. This is fine. This is a secret key. Reading the login manager. I got the issue. So the issue is, if you see here, I'm importing from app.py and then login manager. and I'm loading the user in auth.py. If you go inside app.py, what I'm doing here is, let me remove this, and inside app.py, I'm importing auth. So this is basically a circular import, right? I'm importing auth in app.py, and in auth, I'm importing app.py. So what we have to do is we have to remove this code from auth.py, save it, and paste it in our app.py right over here. Just delete this line, import statement, we don't want it. Save it. Now let's see if our application is running fine. Just clear this, Python. All right, so it's running. Time for the big reveal. Click. So this is our Budget Pro web application. Since we don't have any user ID or password, I'm just going to click on register. Let's create our first user, vivek@.com. Let's say my password is password. Register. Account got created. Now let's log in. So my ID is vivek@gmail. Then password is password. Login. User object has no attribute called password. Do you mean password? Okay, so let's fix this. This should not be that's complicated. Where is it? In auth.py. All right. Register is fine. In login, right? This. So it says user don't have the password column. Okay, spelling mistake. It should be PASWORD. But let's keep going. Refresh this. Continue. Okay, let me log in one more time. Please log in to access this page. Okay, Vivek, password. In auth.py file, let's see. Okay, let's remove this. Refresh. Vivek. Right, so this is our dashboard, right? We have the user email ID, dashboard, add your expenses over here. We don't have any category yet. This is where we create our category. So let's create a category first. Let's say food, add. It got added. If I select this drop down, I should have a food category. Let me add travel, rent, then refresh. And now in categories, I should have all those, categories. Let me add a couple of expenses. Room rent of amount, let's say 7,000. This is on 1st of September, and this is rent. Add expense. The expense got added. Let me add one more. Food. On 1st of September, I spent around 100 rupees on food. Add expense. How about travel? So let's travel plan amount 10,000, and this is expected on, let's say, 26th of September, and this is travel. Add expenses. All right, so the expenses are getting added. This is the form to add our expenses, and here is the area to add the category, and this is our pie chart. Let's log out, and I'll just log in again. Password. So this is our data, right? I also wanted to show you the backend side of this. We have already seen the structures of this table. Now, if you see the users table, we have my ID as the user. And if you see the password, this is all encrypted, right? You cannot read it. So this is totally secure. Check the expenses. Right? So these are the expenses I added. That's it. Congratulations, guys. You have built a secure interactive budget calculator. Next week, we are building a crypto portfolio tracker with live price feeds. Subscribe so you don't miss out. Here is a quick escape challenge for this project. Add a savings goal feature with progress tracker. Share your code in the comments. And most creative solution gets a shout out in the next escape. Want to start simpler? Check out my basic budget calculator. The link is in the description. Perfect for Flask beginner. Like, subscribe, and drop your comments. I would love to hear your thoughts on my videos. Are there any areas I should improve on my videos? Your inputs are most valuable to me. Alright, keep coding. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next one.